again, to use my own case, you can absolutely hate and disagree with everything in the 1619 Project, but does that mean that it should be held out of the public sphere, and that students should not be able to engage with the ideas and arguments of it? Absolutely not.
I'm Kumi Fry, the Director of Faculty Outreach at FIRE. My colleagues and I hear stories every day of protected speech being censored on college campuses. Speakers shouted down, students routinely punished, prospective faculty rejected from publicly funded institutions because of their beliefs. When it comes to faculty, there's no more famous example than Nikole Hannah-Jones, the creator of the New York Times' 1619 Project, and the Knight Chair in Race and Journalism at Howard University. In April 2022, she was denied tenure at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill because of the 1619 Project and her beliefs. I sat down with Nikole for a wide-ranging conversation about academic freedom, tenure, and our polarized political climate. The purpose of our conversation was not to debate academic freedom or resolve disagreements between Nikole's views and FIRE's positions. Rather, the goal is to get a more detailed and accurate representation of Nikole's beliefs than viewers may have been exposed to previously. Enjoy! So first, thank you so much, Nikole, for speaking with me. My name is Kumi Fry, and basically the purpose of this conversation is to get a sense from you of your experiences at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and also how your experiences might be maybe kind of a symptom of a larger problem in academia.
I went through standard tenure process and had my tenure unanimously approved, just as every other Knight Chair before me entered that position with tenure. The expectation was that I would too. A few weeks after my tenure review process, when we were supposed to go before the Board of Trustees, is when it became clear there was going to be some sort of issue. We weren't really given a reason, but I knew pretty much at that point that there was probably some type of political interference happening. Then we were supposed to go up again, and there was no vote on the tenure. And instead, Susan King contacted me and said she had basically been told I was not going to make it through the tenure review. They may or may not bring up my tenure, but she wanted me to still come to the university. So she was offering me instead a 5-year contract in a non-tenured position, but that I could come up for tenure at some time in the future. I accepted that mostly because I just didn't want another public fight. If we go back to when that was happening, I was pretty much constantly being drawn up in battles over the 1619 Project, battles over what was happening in 2020 with the racial justice protests. I was regularly featured on Fox News. Donald Trump was tweeting about me. I didn't want a big public fight, so I accepted. And somehow it was leaked to a conservative think tank that the university, or that the dean had subverted the Board of Trustees, who hadn't taken up my tenure and offered me a 5-year contract. They wrote a story about it, and a local reporter picked it up. And then, of course, it became a big national news story that I had been denied tenure. I was, of course, extremely disappointed. I was disappointed, one, because I know my qualifications. I know the dean had told me that this was the strongest tenure package she had ever seen, that I had the strongest recommendations from faculty who had no relationship to me or the university than she had ever seen. Clearly, my track record of a journalist made me qualified to be a Knight Chair if you compared me to the other Knight Chairs. And also just not having an answer or an explanation as to why, and feeling like after being courted for so long, and the tenure process is a long, arduous process, to not even get a vote, it was embarrassing, and it was devastating. And the lack of transparency and the lack of answers as to why that was, I'm an investigative reporter, so clearly my antennae went up at that. So it was a pretty low period. I had already secured an apartment in North Carolina. I was ready to come teach at my alma mater, which had been very, very good to me. And I think my case really epitomizes why tenure is necessary for academic freedom. The reason why the Board of Trustees did not initially want to vote on my tenure at all was because they didn't like what they believed to be my political views. And we know now, because of reporting and FOIA requests, that there was a wealthy conservative donor who interfered in my tenure process, in my ultimate hiring at the university. And he made very clear that he opposed the 1619 project, that he opposed what he believed to be my political views, and because of that, did not think that I should receive tenure or a teaching position at all at the university. So that's why tenure exists. Tenure exists to protect the academic freedom of faculty members, to ensure that faculty who may have views that become disfavored, views that are controversial, views that politicians don't like, can be protected to pursue their academic courses of study without fear of retribution. And as we see all across the country, these attacks on tenure, I don't think there's any other way but to see them as attacks on academic freedom.
I'm in charge of something called the Scholars Under Fire project at Fire. And I basically have documented all the attempts that have been made since 2000 to professionally punish scholars for speech that is or would in public settings be protected by the First Amendment. And one thing I found is that there's a clear political difference in the kind of ways in which people are targeted. So what you see is that from off campus, the targeting comes overwhelmingly from the right. It comes from politicians, from legislators. It comes from corporations. It comes from the public more broadly, perhaps the public who is informed by sources like Fox News. And then from the left, it tends to come from within campus. It tends to come from faculty and from graduate students and from undergraduates.
Yes, and I do want to point out that I think you have to treat differently students protesting from politicians using the lever of the state and the force of the government to deny speech, versus when we see what happened in my case, or what we're seeing with these laws in Florida and other places that are denying faculty the ability to even teach and talk about certain subjects. We always have to treat that as more egregious, as actually antithetical to free speech, when people are using the levers of the state to deny and control speech. So yes, there are efforts to try to stop professors from exercising their speech in different ways, but I don't think that these two things are comparable in both the danger and the balance. And really, thousands of students rising up and saying we find these views egregious is not the same thing as a politician saying this is illegal. We are prohibiting this. We are banning this by using the force of the law.
Would you say that the efforts by students to, for example, get maybe a very conservative professor fired, that's more of a democratic process, as opposed to efforts by, say, Ron DeSantis to try to ban CRT in institutions of higher education, among other institutions? Do you think
Yes,
it's
most
more of a
definitely.
democratic?
I don't think those two are comparable in any way whatsoever, right? You have a political leader in the state who is able to, by law, prohibit the teaching of certain subjects and ideas, versus people who are protesting against those certain ideas. The power differential is completely different. And even the First Amendment, right? It is protecting against government intervention of speech. It's not protecting against private people who are saying we don't like this and we want to protest. Protest is foundational to the idea of American freedom and democracy. The government, however, infringing on the political speech rights of people, to me, is antithetical to democracy. Well, let me just say I'm glad I'm not a university administrator. I think that one, I think what is clear is that whenever an administration is making a decision um, that seems to proscribe academic freedom, um, this has to be something that is done very, very carefully with a great deal of thought and contemplation, because no matter where this is coming from, it can have a negative impact on academic freedom and higher education. When the assault is coming from the state, I think there has to be an obligation to try to fight back against that, because as we're seeing, it spreads. It might start as one thing, but once you see the state being successful and taking away one right, it usually doesn't stop there. And we are seeing this spreading all across the country. And I think it becomes very dangerous. But I also think, of course, universities, every time students protest, universities don't bow to the protests, right? It becomes a matter of, is this legitimate, right? Is if students, for instance, are protesting an openly racist or openly Nazi professor. I think that there does have to be serious conversations about what are the limits of academic freedom in a multiracial democracy. But I don't think you can make a blanket statement about what's appropriate and what's not in that case. I do think you can make a blanket statement about how universities should respond to the state impinging on academic freedom. I think it has to be much more case by case when it's coming from students airing legitimate or what may be considered illegitimate grievance. I would hope the universities would always err towards as much academic freedom as possible, that even, people can hold views that are antithetical to my own beliefs. And to me, that is the purpose of seeking an education, is to be in a space with people who have all types of divergent beliefs. I mean, again, to use my own case, you can absolutely hate and disagree with everything in the 1619 Project, but does that mean that it should be held out of the public sphere, and that students should not be able to engage with the ideas and arguments of it? Absolutely not. There's no purpose of having systems of higher education if they simply are trying to make us all conform to the same views. I would never say that there is a single rule that applies to every case. I will say, though, that as a Black woman, I would not feel that I should have to take courses with, or feel that my university was condoning someone who is expressly and openly racist. I think academic freedom exists for those people, but I also think the academy has the freedom to say, you can't have those views here. But again, it's one of those slippery slope. It's just, to me, it is hard to make a blanket statement about what is acceptable and what is not. It is challenging to me to understand how diversity and inclusion programs are discriminatory against anyone. But I certainly think there are a lot of white conservatives who do feel under attack. They do feel marginalized. Is that a reality when we look at who holds power and wealth in this country? I don't think so. Is that the reality at a university? And even how we define the left versus the right is very different depending on your perspective, because most of the people, Black people that I know, Black scholars who work at what would be considered left-leaning universities, don't actually think they're that left, and they actually think those universities are quite conservative. So, yes, I think that people who are kind of not in the middle politically, or in the middle in terms of power in general, probably feel challenged by universities. We live in a multiracial society founded on slavery, that is trying in some ways to grapple with that legacy, to believe that there is not going to be discomfort, if that there are not going to be challenges to that. I think that comes for white conservatives from a perspective of being unused to feeling that discomfort. But frankly, that's the normative experience of most people of color. So I don't actually, I had a lot to say about that, but none that probably addresses what I think is largely a non-issue. Of course, it's a worthwhile cause because otherwise we have the society that we have right now, extremely polarized, where we're seeing misinformation, disinformation, election denial, attempts to overturn elections, an insurrection on our capital, and now massive infringements on free speech happening across Republican-led states in this country. So yes, we have to. And interestingly enough, I think to find a key to how we resolve this, we actually have to go to critical race theory with one of the originators of critical race theory, Derek Bell, who talks about this thing called interest convergence, that the way that you get people from disparate backgrounds and who may believe that they have different values and different wants to come together is you find that places in their lives where their interests converge. Election of Obama the first time is a great example of that, right? How do you get all of these conservative white people to cross over and vote for a Black president? Well, they're coming off of the Bush era, right? A terrible and failing economy. And in that moment, their interest converges, right, with Black and brown voters who are all suffering under this economy, who want to find a figure of hope. Unfortunately, this interest conversion doesn't ever seem to last long enough to make the types of fundamental changes. So yes, I think it's possible. I think we have examples of it being possible in our past, but the challenge is how do you sustain those cross-racial, cross-generational, cross-gender movements over time? And I'm glad that you all are doing this because even though I don't always agree with what you all choose to focus on, I think you are definitely an important voice for academic freedom in a times where it's facing a lot of challenges. So I appreciate you taking the time.